Hello, welcome to Drugs Unwrapped with me, Rob. Today we are joined by Shannon and Hannah. Hannah, for you, 2024, how is it going so far?
I'm just knackered, to be honest. Vitamin D levels low, sleeping all, just straight away after work. I'm just completely out of sorts. But yeah, no, apart from that, pretty good.
You should be all refreshed. You had a lovely holiday just before Christmas.
It was not a lovely holiday. I got dragged up 1,300 steps, and it was just constant movement and exercise. It was exhausting.
Not for relaxing.
There was no resting.
Or was it Thailand you went, yeah?
Yeah, Thailand.
Nice. And Shannon, for you, 2024 so far?
Yeah, good. I came back from Portugal on Tuesday, so that was very nice. Was looking forward to the annual leave, so it's nice to have some time off. But yeah, all good, all round, yeah. Settling back into work now, so that's nice.
Fab, excellent. So today, we're going to talk about something we haven't really discussed yet, maybe kind of in passing with regards to other episodes. But ultimately about the social acceptability of drugs. So I know, Shannon, that was something that you kind of put to the table when we were kind of looking at kind of episodes to put on. So why was that something that you wanted to kind of discuss?
So I'd been having just a general conversation with my friend about obviously this line of work that I'm in and the job and what it involves, and we were saying, why is there almost this double standard when it comes to drugs and alcohol issues and this kind of uncomfortability around it? Why do people feel that perhaps it's over stigmatized, having a drug problem is perhaps less socially acceptable than maybe people that have struggled with alcohol, and why is that? And it was just obviously personal opinions, but the conversation was really interesting, and I thought maybe other people would be interested in hearing our opinions on that as well. But yeah, I don't know.
Is that something in terms of, I guess, within your kind of social circle, is alcohol just pretty norm as what I guess you would associate with most social circles?
Yeah.
But then, not to kind of give the game away in terms of yours, but is the use of illicit drugs kind of there in the background, so to speak, from what you're aware of?
Yeah, I just feel that people will be a lot more open and honest if they, with the alcohol use, your friends drinking alcohol, going to pubs and things, it's just a lot more out in the open, and only when you have certain conversations with people, they will then come to admit about their drug or recreational drug use. And it's kind of but they'll openly binge drink on weekends. So it's really interesting to see, why is that? Obviously there's the legality side of things, but yeah, why are we more open for the conversations around alcohol versus drugs? I'm not too sure. But yeah, what do you think, Han?
Yeah, I think it's an important topic of discussion. I think it's interesting when you say about kind of telling people what you do for a living. I think for me, it's slightly different in the sense that if I tell people kind of my own age, they're quite oh, that's interesting, gosh, you must come across some stuff. But again, even just saying, gosh, you must come across some stuff, some people who come in are just quite nice, normal people who just want to know how to do something every now and then a little bit more safely, if that can even be achieved. But then when kind of parents of friends, or I remember telling my grandparents, and people are very oh God, why would you want to do that kind of thing? And they're sat there with their glass of wine, maybe their fourth glass of wine of the night, and I'm oh, you're on your second bottle though, and they've had that for 3 nights in a row, but then they're very sensitive when you kind of highlight that difference. And even when you're working with young people and you try and speak to a parent in that way and say something similar, and yeah, but you drink alcohol, and they're very then defensive of their alcohol intake. I don't have a problem, and and yeah, I think there's something very separate between the alcohol and the drugs.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that comes down to a legality perspective though? As a whole?
I don't know, because I think people are some people look down on smoking, which is obviously legal, and people like look down on vaping, but I think that's probably because it's associated with kids and like maybe like antisocial behaviour in a way, and like underage kids vaping, and like the scourge on society. I think it's more around like that idea of like like maybe like moral panic, or like the corruption of the young people and things like that. And I think because adults drink alcohol, they don't necessarily see maybe 15-year-olds up messing around with alcohol being a corruption of society, because then you're kind of criticizing yourself, you're looking inward on yourself when it's something that you do, so you don't want to see that as like a corruption of young people. But then when you think about like vaping, smoking, like using cannabis, using cocaine,
it's like antisocial,
it's like,
isn't it?
Antisocial. That's not something I do.
No, because like the alcohol is almost like social behaviour, because it's like always around like an event, or like going somewhere to drink, like a pub or something, whereas like the drugs, maybe because of the legality of it being more of like an insular thing that you do with like a small group of people, it's antisocial behaviour, and therefore it's looked on in a negative way, I think.
But it's quite interesting in terms of like, if you think about nitrous oxide, they banned nitrous oxide and made it a Class C drug based on the antisocial behaviour.
But it was like what you do like when you're out. Do you know what I mean? Like obviously it is like and it's risky-ness, but it's weird. It's like in the social settings where you'd probably drink as well, isn't it? The people were using it, so it's like
Which other drug would you say is as close to alcohol in terms of from a social acceptability from your perspective? Like, because obviously you mentioned like cigarettes, and obviously they kind of align with alcohol from a legislative perspective in that they are legal, and obviously vapes as well. But I guess in terms of what you see with regards to vapes, it doesn't kind of go down that line in terms of alcohol, how it's viewed. Is that kind of like what you see, Han, in terms of with regards to vapes?
I think it depends on how you vape, because I think when I, like, in my experience, when I've seen people kind of with those big, monstrous, mechanical, refillable vapes, and, you know, they're like a middle-aged person who is like, I'm just going outside for a vape a second, and they go outside and they are using vapes for their intended purpose, almost as something to reduce them away from cigarettes. They go outside, and I think in those times people don't really care. I think it's more like the disposable vapes, or the like more funky looking refillable vapes that people will just like puff on in your front room without even going, oh, do you mind if I vape? And it's just like, oh, okay. And like I'll say myself, like, in those moments I'm like,
what are you doing?
You could have just like lit up a cigarette, and like it's basically the same thing. But I think it's kind of interesting to make that comparison, because at the same time, can you imagine if somebody was just sat in your front room and just cracked open a can? Like, it would be like, okay. It's almost like, I think when people have these vapes and they kind of do it in the allotted settings that we do in society, like when they nip outside for their vape, just like how you would nip outside for a cigarette, or like when people have a drink on a Friday night or have a drink with their food, those are kind of the places where they're allowed. But then I think the difference then with like the disposable vapes and the kind of funky refillable vapes, of saying more kind of young people, and that association with the antisocial behaviour is like it's the kind of caricature of a child just like puff, puff, puff. And that thing of, it's almost like the thing with mobile phones, isn't it? It's like, oh, you can't separate the kid from their mobile phone, and it's almost becoming the same thing with the vape. Yeah,
I was going to like piggyback on that then, and we were chatting in the office about how because we're young person workers, about how there was this young person who actually didn't know when it was socially acceptable to vape. So you know how we've grown up with cigarettes, and then cigarettes obviously were like banned from like public, you know, you couldn't smoke in the pub anymore and stuff. Well, these young people who perhaps, you know, weren't aware of all that going around, they actually don't know, and they were a bit embarrassed to say, I don't know when it's actually acceptable to vape. Like, I actually don't know where that line is, because they can do it whenever the access is like there, isn't it? See kids doing it like in classrooms and stuff. But it's interesting to think, oh, hang on a minute, rather than them just being rude or however you want to perceive it, some of them actually need a bit more education on when it's okay and socially acceptable, again, going back to that, to vape.
The messaging's not clear.
It's not.
You do see more signs now saying like no smoking or vaping.
Yeah.
But that's actually really interesting because obviously, what was it, 2006, 2007, the smoking ban?
Yeah.
So like, I was little, but I do remember you are not allowed to smoke indoors.
Yeah.
And there are penalties for smoking indoors. But I think as well, like, you know, if I just decided to light a cigarette now, it'd be very obvious. Whereas like I go to gigs and people are like, and then like hide it underneath their jumper, and it's like, you're still doing it.
Yeah.
That's still not allowed.
Yeah.
But you can't tell.
No.
Whereas if you crack open a can, you can tell.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
It's there. You can see it.
And there's like the scent is like, I know it's, you know, the artificial flavors and stuff. Okay, then maybe they're not as offensive in terms of like the strong nicotine scent, but they're strong.
Yeah.
Like it is like someone's like eating candy floss next to you, like times 100. Do you know what I mean? They're strong. Is that antisocial then, as well? Even though the scent's not off-putting, it's not like cannabis where it stinks, but you know someone's vaped when they're next to you if they're smoking fruity things. Do you know what I mean?
It's like when you used to be in like the PE changing rooms and everybody used to get like really like screamed at for spraying all the
everyone's doing the deodorant,
and they'd be like, stop spraying. So it's kind of the same thing,
really. Yeah, it is a weird one, isn't it? And like the THC vapes and stuff, they have no scent.
Yeah, and that's a massive issue when you think about the fact that, you know, people are buying, and this is what I'm worried about with the banning of the disposable vapes. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody raised a point to me the other day about the banning of the disposable vapes and how, like, it is important because obviously it does need to be curbed, but my worry is now that young people are going to buy vapes off people, and they're not going to know what they're having.
Yeah.
And for all you know, they could actually say like, oh, I'm gonna go and buy a vape, and the only person they've got to buy a vape off actually turns around to them and goes, oh, do you want some of this as well?
Yeah.
And then we're introducing a whole load of issues as well. But, you know, I don't want to say don't ban disposable vapes, because I think, you know, litter and the attraction to kids, and you can still have like the refillable ones, like you're not taking away nicotine from people, but young people aren't going to get those ones because of the money they have, and, you know, so it's a whole load of issues then as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
But yeah,
it's a new issue that we're like
very new
very new that we're coming up against. But
it all happens so quickly as well, isn't it? Like I remember when it started off as you just had like shisha pens, and then next thing you know there's all these vapes, but it is mad. And I think it's interesting when you speak about like what is acceptable as well, because obviously drawing the line about the kind of parallel with alcohol and vaping and that comparison, but I think as well like cannabis, and I think there's almost this thing where, I don't know about you, but I've almost started to experience that cannabis is more socially acceptable than smoking tobacco, where it's like when I'm working with people for a start who are smoking cannabis, like, I don't want to increase the tobacco in my spliff because that's bad for you. So it's like this thing of people want to move away from tobacco. But then there's also things like, I know loads of people that will not smoke cigarettes, but they'll vape and they'll smoke cannabis. And I think the most amazing one I ever came across was I was walking round Primark in Swansea, and there was this guy just walking around with a spliff behind his ear, and I was like,
what are you doing?
You do know that's illegal. Like, you actually can get like in trouble for that. But it was like just as if it was like
nothing,
a pen just stuck behind his ear. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, okay, you know, walking around with a spliff behind your ear in Primark as you do. But yeah, it was just like as if it's completely normal.
I think as well, like with the young people, like when we've been working with them, and I've like, you know, say the issue that they have is with cannabis, and then they're like, okay, so do you smoke cigarettes? No, I don't smoke cigarettes. It's like, okay, but I'll, like you said, vape and do a bit of cannabis, like smoke now and again, and it's just like,
so put them together.
Like, yeah. And like the nicotine like concentrations in vapes and stuff vary so and stuff higher as well, and it's really really high. So it's just, we've started to say to some young people about like diluting like them with like other juices, like the THC ones, because they're just of such a high concentrate that it's just ridiculous. But again, that's easy access, isn't it? Rather than rolling a spliff, they can just get a THC vape. and it's quick, it's easy, there's no of that extra effort there, is it
doesn't
really?
stink.
Doesn't stink, yeah, literally. And then again, going back to the smell being like not socially acceptable for cannabis, you know when someone's smoking cannabis around you, you know, even people who don't smoke, like even my nan knows what cannabis smells like. Do you know what I mean? It's just one of them.
So 2 questions for you then. So one, are some people that you've like worked with and come across starting to move away from traditional cannabis as you know, in terms of like spliffs? Are they moving away from that to like THC vapes? And then the second question, in terms of those who do smoke cannabis, do they just smoke it anywhere, do you know, just in public?
I've recently, it's been a lot of the THC vapes that's come up, and not as much of like the smoking cannabis, but it's still there. Do you know what I mean? People are still doing it, but it's just that there's something new, and the THC vape is like intriguing to people because, you know, maybe it's a new thing and kids are curious, aren't they? Like that's just how it is. But I wouldn't say that they're like one's replacing the other. Yet. I mean, there's time, but at the minute I would say they're pretty on par. But I'm just seeing, because the THC vapes are new, more people have been experimenting and like trying them.
Do they get the same effect?
Well, no, like they're varied, they're really intense. The THC vapes are a lot, like people are getting really unwell. Like that's our campaign at the minute for Carmarthenshire, is going into schools and telling everyone about the dangers of the THC vapes, because again, you know, nothing new drug comes along, it's unregulated, there's all sorts in it, mixed with other substances. Like they've done tests and some have had fentanyl in them as well. So it's that danger again of, you know, it's not legal, it's illegal, you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, I think they think it's legal because you always get the mixed messaging of obviously vapes are legal, and then you get all the stuff about it being legal, like cannabis being legal in parts of America. And when you think about like younger teenagers and stuff looking at TikTok, like all the messaging you're getting is from all over the world, so some people might be seeing stuff that is saying about it being legal and they're not sure where that's coming from. So there's lots of mixed messaging, but it's quite funny because I've got somebody on my caseload who was using a THC vape and turned out it was synthetics, and he had like 2 or 3 seizures and was in a coma for like 36 hours. He's only 19, he's all right now, luckily. But it's terrifying, and he won't go near them now, but his mates are apparently still going back to using them all. Crazy. And they just, there's that like that immortality type thing in it,
invincible
but
mindset.
I think what I'm seeing as well is like a big switch to bonging, more than I've seen before. I've seen a lot of people switch into bonging, so that's just something I've seen. So that's quite interesting. I think people are just trying to be a little bit more like creative. Maybe they think it's not as bad for you as smoking because it's smoking, you know.
It's like they can distinguish that like smoking cigarettes is bad, isn't it? Like that's like, you know, because that's been drummed into us now. It's been years of studies, years of tests. Vaping is still new, and it seems like there's no consequences for it yet, because I don't feel like we've had the longevity of and the benefit of hindsight with it yet, you know.
Plus it came in as a public health option, didn't it? Like exactly. This is better than smoking. But
do you know then, in terms of like, to bring it back to like alcohol and the social acceptability, in terms of cannabis then, would you say cannabis is the one drug that is as close to alcohol in terms of social acceptability compared to every other drug?
I think it is. And I don't know if you find this, but I almost feel like you're either a cannabis person or an alcohol person. You don't get people who
dabble and
do both.
I agree. You're in 2 camps. Like, 100%.
Cannabis people, if I'm going to somebody who's like using cannabis daily, they're always like, oh yeah, like I never drink. And that initially came as a massive shock to me, because I was just like, well, if you do what, you know, when you start, you're a bit like, well, if you do any other kind of drug, you're obviously going to do alcohol, because that's the gateway drug, that's the legal drug. Because I don't view cannabis as the gateway drug. I think it's alcohol, because we're exposed to it and it's legal. If there is a gateway drug at all. But like I was just a bit like, oh, okay, it's the norm now that you are just your cannabis or alcohol.
I find it interesting that like a lot of young people I've worked with will, like you said about the cannabis, say like, oh yeah, openly express, oh yeah, I smoke cannabis. Oh, I don't really drink on the weekends though. Like, whereas I think obviously years ago that may have been like a different
the other
view.
way around, yeah.
And then it's like, but then the parents freak out when it's like they're smoking cannabis, but are they gonna freak out if like they're socializing on the weekend and they have a bit of a drink?
And that's the thing, is that most
like,
parents would be like, if you were 15 or something, like a lot of parents would be like, oh, I'd rather them drink in the house than go out and they can have a few friends
I'll just
around.
buy them one
WKD.
just so that they can socialize and take part. You're not going to get a parent being like one spliff.
And then when you think about actually the physical harms of alcohol and you know, development as well, compared to the physical harms of cannabis, you know, I'm not going to say obviously cannabis is good for you, but like, and it's got psychological impact, but the physical harms of alcohol on development is very significant. But because of the social acceptability, you know,
there's
like,
less of that
I used to
fear.
have parties at my house when I was, you know, like 15, 16, and people, you know, again, like you said, like the WKD. But if I went out the garden and I'd have a spliff, like my mum would have had a fit. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, like, yeah, it's mad.
It is crazy.
Do you think that social like acceptability then around alcohol comes from like family dynamics and what you see in terms of growing up? Because like, I don't know about you, but like when I was a kid, my parents would drink, you know, whether it be like with a meal, you know, in the house, or like, you know, going out for food and stuff. They wouldn't really kind of like sit around and have a beer or wine or anything, just watching TV. That just wasn't their style. But, you know, you could imagine in many households that's it. Like, Han, do you think that is where maybe social acceptability kind of, a lot of it stems from, would you say, in terms of from individual to individual? Because like, if, as you said, you know, if you for example, when you were like 14, 15, 16, were going to have a WKD, I don't know why you'd have a WKD, but each to their own, right?
It was blue.
But like, there probably wasn't much of a, you know, many people wouldn't bat an eyelid at that, you know, even though you're underage, so to speak. But like you said, if you were to then alternatively light up a spliff, then heads would turn, you know. So would you say, in terms of like from that kind of social acceptability in relation to alcohol, that actually what your experience of it growing up, that actually plays quite a significant part, or do you see there's other kind of cultural or societal factors at play?
I think, like, just interestingly to mention, because of the WKD and being younger, was actually my first appointment of the day said, like, my first time I had alcohol was WKD that my mum gave me. And she was like, I just had half a bottle because, like, that's for kids, isn't it? I was like, is it? But, you know, it's viewed as, like, the teenagers drinking it. But I think, yeah, massively down to families and societal factors, because it just pops into my head around when we, you know, talking about culture and societal factors. Like, it's very different in Britain to America, because again, we've got like the 18 to 21 difference. And I think like the almost as well, like when you look at kind of presentations in the media of teenagers and kind of like people in college and stuff in America, like it's almost like it's pushed back further and they do drink less in America, like in the films, you know.
Yeah, but think of Spring Break, man.
Yeah, and then you got like Spring Break, and then they all go like absolutely nuts. Yeah, but like
Cancun.
I've tasted American beer, like it's so weak. But then I think like we are, like, I mean, Brits on holiday are known, aren't they? Like we're another breed, and I think there's like we speak a lot about it on like other podcasts. I mean, like the Great British like Institution or whatever it was called, like the protection of our pubs and stuff. So I think it's inherent to British culture, but I also think there's a massive part with families, because, you know, I think we've spoken about it on other podcasts as well, where it's like it's almost like a milestone giving your child their first drink, leading them down that path.
Almost, like,
and you just think, you know, you wouldn't give your child their first line of coke, or well, some parents might, I don't know, but you know, their first spliff, and yeah, it's really,
It's so
it's
weird
really
when you think
odd. Like,
about
why
it.
is it okay? But again, I really think it comes back to we are protective of what we do. Like, you hear people who smoke cannabis say, "Oh, I don't have a problem," and we don't want to maybe admit that we drink too much alcohol as individuals or as a nation, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I think it's that thing of like, oh, I'm gonna pass on my positive memories and my positive experiences to my children. I'm gonna give them their first drink, and yeah, I don't know, like, because my mum or dad gave me my first drink, and yeah, like you said, it's like a big rite of passage.
Yeah. And it's like that thing of like, well, if I don't give them the alcohol, they're going to get it
Someone
from someone
else
else.
might.
But you're not going to take that approach for any other substance,
definitely.
are you? Like, it's just, and like, I was thinking about like pubs again, about this, we were on about this in work, about how there's play areas in pubs, in the gardens, and the beer gardens. It's like almost like, yeah, bring your kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then they offer like colouring stuff and things. It's like, you know, and I don't, not to say that every parent who goes to the pub with their kids are getting like binge drinking and, you know, drinking a lot, but there is that like, it's a family space, and I just think that's very weird. Like, I don't know, when you think of it like that. I agree. You know, I know, like with food, maybe it's more acceptable to have a drink, but I don't know, it just seems very like odd.
Yeah, that makes me think about when you go to a restaurant or a pub for food, and there's the rule, isn't there, that if you're over 16, you're with your parents or you're with a responsible adult and you're having a meal, you can have like one glass of something. And it's almost like as a nation, we are introducing these things to our young people. Like, even the fact that if you're in the home supervised by parents, you can drink alcohol over the age of 5. Like, where's that come from? And how out of context is that taken as well? Because obviously, if you are just having like a sip of shandy or something on New Year's Eve or something, like, you know, it's just it's not going to do anything. It's just a little taste, you know. But yeah, like, actually practicing having a drink with your meal at the age of 16 in a pub, in a like kind of drinking space.
It's that ritual, like that association with like, oh, having like a sit down formal meal, have a drink. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And you're implementing that from such a young age. It's the norm. And
I've always found it weird because like my parents never did like have my dad doesn't even have like a glass of water with his food. He's really weird. But like sometimes he'll have a cup of tea. Oh, you freak.
Cup of tea with his dinner.
I know. It's so weird. He gets it from his dad. It's like just gone down generationally. It's the Irish, you know. But no, it's just really weird. Like I just feel like that it makes sense to me, but it's not something I experienced growing up. And so like almost habitually now, I never drink alcohol with food. I find it weird. I'm like, I want like something that's gonna get like, you know, wash the food down. I feel like alcohol's on another, do you know, it's another thing separate to that. But it is weird how people come like used to the habit of doing that. And I do think exposure within your family plays a massive role. But yeah, I don't know, like I think my kind of relationship with alcohol and my experience with alcohol has been formed by that sort of house party culture when you're a teenager. And you know, I think I was usually the host when I was a teenager because my mum was very much the thing of, I want to see what you're doing. You know, I don't trust other people's parents. I want to know what you're up to. And to be fair, we were like the nerdy kids. We had a good group of people. Nobody ever got like smashed. But like, you know, it is weird in a way because you are just supervising a group of underage kids drinking alcohol. But at the same time, is that a form of harm reduction? But then why are parents so sensitive about offering harm reduction around drugs? Yes, like if you walk past 2 gardens and one had a group, like a family and like some young teenagers that were all drinking, having a barbecue drinking, and next door there was a family, they were all sharing a spliff, right? You would be stopped, you'd stop in your tracks and be like, what are they doing? But like do you know what I mean? It's just so weird. I don't know, maybe I'm just generalizing, but the antisocial behavior that comes with the alcohol
when people get leery and like, you know, you'll feed into that atmosphere. Like if you see a group of people that are just having a smoke, they tend to be on a different level of like, they're a bit more chilled and relaxed, and if anything they're not causing as much, I mean, again, I am generalizing, they're not causing as much of a ruckus as people having like full on party with alcohol. So why?
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be a full on party, does it?
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine now you've got kids, you and your partner share a bottle of wine of an evening. Nobody would really bat an eyelid if something happens and your child does need to go to hospital. You just ring the grandparents or something, or your siblings, to help you kind of get them into A&E or whatever. Whereas if that exact situation happened and you were high, or you had a couple of puffs of a spliff, you'd be in the shit, you know, like you would. And I think it's interesting because obviously when there is actually social services involvement and stuff, there is more scrutiny put on things, and there would be conversations around, why are you know, drinking alcohol, why there needs to be somebody that's that's sober, and we do have those safety planning conversations, but that's only when there is already scrutiny on a family. And I feel like when there's not scrutiny on a family, particularly middle class families, because there's obviously the difference between like a middle class mum and a bottle of wine and a middle class mum and a 4 cans of cider. We see it very differently, even though it's the same thing. But like, you know, like that's okay. But if you were mildly intoxicated from cannabis, that's not. And I think as well, potentially where the difference might lie is that if you're intoxicated from alcohol, the direct impact of that intoxication is on your body, whereas with cannabis there's secondhand smoke, and maybe that might play a
that's interesting
slight role in that difference. Maybe because you got the secondary effects of being drunk, because you can't care for a child, or you know, you could do something that could frighten a child or confuse a child, and you got like those kind of secondary effects there. But it's almost like you consuming it's like if I drink alcohol right now, none of you guys are going to be physically affected by my consumption of alcohol, whereas if I light a spliff and I'm smoking, or even a cigarette, there's the smell of that, there's the smoke, do you know what I mean? Like there's the passive effects of that. Like it's no longer your choice not to do something because you're being acted upon.
I will say that the change in behaviour from alcohol, I know friends, when we've had discussions about parents having a drink, that's remember vividly seeing their parent drunk for the first time and being like noticeably upset, to the point where like now in their adulthood they're like, oh, I remember seeing my mum drunk and it made me cry, because I was like, what is wrong with her, you know? She wasn't doing anything. Be quite frightening. She could just be like having a great time, really funny, being a bit silly maybe, and a bit slow with her responses or something, but it caused them distress to the point that they remember that. You know, like that's like definitely.
So I think it's more the kind of the more emotional impact that then doesn't necessarily get looked at, maybe again because obviously we more focus on mental health and things like that, and the emotional impact of things is it's new, whereas like physical health impacts have always been the kind of, you know, where it's at, more important. But you know, realistically, if somebody was like a bit stoned, it's probably going to be less obvious than to a child anyway. You can just pass it off being like, oh, I'm just a bit tired, you know what I mean? Than if somebody was drunk, you know. And like, I'm trying to think now to times where I've seen like my parents have come back from things, and like, you know, I can clearly see the difference. It was usually quite funny, to be fair, but like, you know, like I could see how somebody could be distressed by that or upset by that, especially if you are unfortunately somebody whose parents does have a negative reaction when drinking alcohol, that, you know, that side of them maybe comes out. So that can be quite traumatic to grow up with.
Definitely.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions, right?
We've just nattered.
No, not at all. I'm just intrigued. So this is just kind of general, okay? Not necessarily specifically thinking about maybe like parents who potentially have got a dependency around alcohol or have issues with other drugs, okay? So a few scenarios for you. I don't know how well this will work on a podcast, but on a scale of 0 to 10, and 10 being absolutely fine, right?
Okay.
Absolutely cool. You know, you'd kind of see it and wouldn't think anything else of it. And 0 being, oh my days, call the cops. You know, this is unbelievable, right? parents drinking at home or drinking when their kids are present? How acceptable is that? So I've got a 2.5-year-old, right?
Yeah.
How acceptable would it be for me to have a beer watching the rugby on Saturday afternoon?
Oh, 10. Like, that would be fine. But, like, it's different.
And he's around me.
Yeah, I think the difference is as well, I need to remember that because we work in the drug and
I
alcohol.
think we trivialise stuff a bit, and
Yeah.
like, things are normalised for us as well.
Yeah, we are. So, like, take everything we say with a pinch of salt, I think, because we're so around it that, like, yeah, we do talk about it in a flippant way because it's our life. We're around it all the time. Whereas someone who's coming in, like my nan maybe, or someone who's like not, they would obviously have a complete different
Definitely
thing on it. But I feel like when I think of like families in general around like where I live and stuff, most of them will have some drinks while they're watching the rugby with their kids, regardless of age.
I'd say it depends on what you like when you watch rugby.
Yeah, that's true. You might not even need a drink to be like,
because alcohol being added to the mix might be a really bad thing.
100%.
How acceptable is it to drop a few F-bombs and a few C-bombs?
Honestly, like watching rugby with my dad growing up was traumatic. He's very, very passionate.
So a 10 from your perspective.
I'm talking about like what I think society would deem as okay.
Okay.
So I feel like that would be socially acceptable in society.
I think society would say 10.
And that probably happen in many households.
Yeah.
And I guess similar scenario then in terms of, I'll just stick with myself just because, I do have a 2.5-year-old. But like, if I go to the pub for a meal and I have a beer, you know, and my kid's there as well, that's okay,
Yeah.
I think society would be saying,
Yeah, that's again, not my opinion of it, but socially, that's fine.
But he's got colouring to do.
Yeah, or I was in the park, in the garden, like, you know, in the pub, like, it's all good. Yeah.
I think it depends as well on who's around. Like, if your partner is there and they happen to be sober, or if your partner's, obviously it'd be a completely different story if you were like, what if me and my partner have like 4 pints and then we put the 2.5-year-old in the car and drive home?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that would be a solid 0. But if it's like you're having a couple, and your partner's driving and they haven't had anything, like there's no real risk with that. Everything's okay as long as you're behaving.
Yeah.
Okay. Ham, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being completely acceptable, okay? You got a couple of parents, they've gone out for a night out. They've left their child, however old, with a babysitter. And they both come home intoxicated. And they relieve the babysitter of their duty. How acceptable would you say that is?
Not acceptable, because you're caring for a child while you're intoxicated. I would probably be putting that more towards like 1 or 2. Maybe even lower. Like my worry in that, like from we're doing like family work, we would always do safety planning around like the first part is amazing, like there's a babysitter, the child's cared for, they're not witnessing, but it was always like, make sure when you come home the child is not witnessing anything and that the child is still safe. Like we'd always go on the assumption of worst comes to worst, child needs to go to A&E. If both parents are intoxicated and there's no one else in the house that's sober, that's a massive risk. So like I always used to say, like there'd be times where I'd be working with people who were living with their parents, so baby's grandparents, and they'd go out, leave the baby with the grandparents, and then they'd come home and they'd sleep in a different room. They wouldn't wake the baby anything. That in my eyes is fine because the baby's not, or the child's not being exposed to it, and the grandparents are sober on hand if anything goes wrong. So it's like, that's the difference for me, is if you're going to go out and you're going to drink, you still have to live your life and protect the child from seeing anything. But the concern would be then you've kind of like nullified all of the safety planning you've done by telling the person who can continue to support you while you're drunk to go home.
And also, like, have you ever like come home from a night out and it's just like you're in bed and that's it, you are like gone from the world. Like
if the
how
baby
are
cries,
you supposed to care for a child and be in that state? I just don't get it. Like, you can barely look after yourself if you're that intoxicated, so I would agree with Han on that one.
And everything's spinning.
Oh my god, I know. Can you imagine?
So would your answer differ if those parents have been out and they've been smoking cannabis or had a few lines of cocaine? Would you see that as even less acceptable, or would it still be kind of on the same level as what you said around alcohol?
I think it's on par for me. And as well, like, I was working with a family, there was a single father, and he used to smoke 1 spliff a night, and he had decent tolerance, and he had a plan that so his sister or somebody lived a few doors down, and they always had a plan that if anything did happen, because she was so close by, she would then be able to drive them anywhere they needed to go and things like that. So it was actually kind of agreed with social services that he'd made loads of progress, and that 1 spliff a night, given his tolerance, smoked outside, hidden from the children, they had no idea, was actually acceptable because he had planned around it still.
There's a consideration for the kids there, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's not
and
just
they were never exposed to it, and they were always safe, and there was always a way that they could get what they needed, and because of his tolerance, he was still able to care for them. So I think it really depends on how intoxicated you get, but in general I'd be saying it's sort of the same as alcohol. Like, if you're intoxicated, then you're intoxicated. You can't care for a child, you know.
This is getting deep.
It is.
Talking about looking after children.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah.
But do you think in terms of like the social acceptability of certain drugs depends upon the environment?
Oh yeah, because if you've got no
if you-
kids, it's about who's impacting as well. Like, I think the reason people almost see it as different is because your choices are impacting on somebody else, and somebody who's, you know, kind of seen as helpless and like defenseless to society, and somebody that is completely dependent on you. And so if you're choosing to do something that is negatively impacting that child, then I think we're more not judgmental, but like we're more protective of that as a society, because I think it comes down to your actions impacting on somebody else. Whereas if you just live alone, or if it's you and your partner or something and you both decide to do it, you're only affecting yourself in a way. You know?
Yeah.
It's like it's even things like if I went out and I got smashed and I come back to my flat on my own, I'd be fine. But these days, like, you know, I mean, I live with my parents. So if I go out and I get smashed and I come home and I'm like knocking everything over, and my mum's got to go to work in the morning, my dad's got to go to work in the morning, they're going to be like fuming with me. So that's less acceptable because I'm disrupting everybody around me. I don't think it's necessary just for kids either. Whereas if I just turned up, like just passed out in my flat on my own, nobody's like affected by that.
I remember when I was like growing up. So when you said you were kind of like quite small when the smoking ban came in, I was at uni then, right?
Oh my god, I think I was 7.
But I
Sorry,
remember
Rob.
in terms of that, like you'd go into like pubs and stuff, and obviously people would be smoking, and like at the end of the night your clothes would stink of smoke. And then suddenly the ban came in, and like you just literally just smelled sweat, especially in the clubs and stuff. But like, yeah, you know, I remember like going home and after like nights out, and I'd usually go out with my best mate at the time, who lived like a couple of doors down, and the amount of times I'd speak to like his mum or something the next day, and he'd be hammered, you know. But like she would go, oh yeah, he'd come in, and literally I'd just have a bucket there ready waiting for him, you know. So it was that kind of, it was really it was just,
It's
Is it
fine,
okay?
like whereas what if they knew that they were going out to do drugs?
yeah.
Would there be pupils all like
would
dilated?
there be like the bad, you know, the sheets pulled back ready for them to get into bed? Do you mean like the bucket? Would there be that level of care and consideration for someone who was going out to do that? But when you're going out drinking, oh, it's fine, I'll accommodate make sure there's things in place that they're comfortable when they come home. It's really weird.
And like I always remember as well, like
It's almost like a well done at the end of the night.
Yeah, it is. Like, here you go.
Nice clean sheets, nice comfy bed.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it is though. You're so right. Like, let's not make you get up to be sick. Let's, you know, facilitate a bucket so that it's easier for
which
you.
if you came home with like dilated pupils and you get a bollocking.
Yeah. You'd be like, some people get kicked out for stuff like that, you know? It's just...
or turning up stinking of weed.
Yeah.
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 You're not coming in my house.
Yeah.
But if you came home covered in your own sick, oh, well, let me help you.
Yeah.
Do you know what
Get
I
that
mean?
top off. Yeah. Like, fine. It's weird.
Yeah, but like in terms of like, yeah, like I said, in terms of like with regards to like other environments, because if you take, say, like ketamine, I would assume maybe ketamine in terms of taking it just in the pub. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit out of touch, but ketamine in the pub probably is not kind of seen as okay as what it would in a festival. Do you know? So do you think like the environments in terms of and where people are, because like even to the point of what day of the week it is.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Do you know, is it okay for someone who they haven't got any issues with ketamine, but they work and stuff. So on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, I've got somebody I was working with who, he was using ketamine 3 times weekly, and you know he was working pretty much full time on shifts, and he would use probably like a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Saturday, and the Tuesday and the Thursday it would be like in the pub, and then he'd come home and finish off what he had at home, and then the Saturday it would just mainly be at the pub. And I think the first time we had that conversation, my brain instantly went to, oh, the pub, not a club. But then I was like, well, surely, he said he's using it 3 times a week. He's not going clubbing 3 times a week. Do you know what I mean? Unless you're a student. But and I think then I had that unconscious bias of thinking, no, that is not where that drug belongs.
Yeah.
But then like it is almost like when you're out and about to when you're at home, and where does the pub belong in the middle of that? Like, you know, like MDMA at a rave or a festival versus like MDMA in a pub. It's not an environment conducive to it, but like, is it then problematic?
Yeah.
And then MDMA in your house. And again, like all those different drugs, and thinking about where you would typically consider them, and then in different environments, how that changes. Again, like drinking alcohol alone in your bedroom is very different to drinking alcohol in a pub or with your family. But then equally, what if it's Friday evening, I've run a bath, I'm gonna have a glass of wine in the bath, and I'm gonna finish my glass of wine off while I'm watching the TV in my room while I'm chilling. Is that not acceptable? Why do we instantly go, you're drinking alcohol on your own in your house, this is bad, you have a problem? Because that's not necessarily bad. But I just think that we do kind of associate drugs with different locations, and then we implement our unconscious bias based off that. And we've just got to take a moment to really think, is it bad? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was thinking about like with the ketamine in the pub situation, like if I've been to festivals and people offer you drugs, like you just go, oh, like you don't even bat an eyelid, you just go, oh no, like whatever. But if someone came up to you in a pub and was like, do you want this? I'd be like, what are you doing? It's a pub. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like what, like what are you doing? Like,
my first day at Isle of Wight, somebody came up to me and offered me drugs. He was like, do you want some drugs? And then I painted a magic mushroom on his leg, and he was very happy, and he waddled away. But like he was so happy. He was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I was just like, okay, good luck selling your drugs. If he'd have come up, I was ready for that to happen.
Yeah, you anticipate it because it's kind of a given.
Whereas if he'd come up to me in the pub and be like, do you want some drugs? I'd be like, no,
while you're eating
bag
your
her
meal,
off.
while you're eating your burger and chips or whatever, you'd be like, what are you doing?
I'd be like, leave me alone.
Yeah. So it is, there
100%.
is that, like I think there's definitely something.
And it's where you were looking for it as well. Like obviously there probably were a lot of people at Isle of Wight, even though it's quite a family festival, but there were probably people being like, where can I get drugs? Yeah. Whereas people might not, you don't necessarily get that in the pub. You wouldn't walk into a pub expecting someone to approach you selling drugs. You'd probably go to, if you were planning to do it, go sort yourself out first, then go to the pub.
And then that catches you by surprise, because it's like, hang on, this isn't the space for this.
This is not where we do this.
Yes, which is really odd.
Did you ever experience, I know it's completely off topic, when you were in the pub, people coming around selling DVDs?
What?
No. Are you too young? Are you too young, man?
That's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Selling?
People used to come into pubs and sell DVDs and CDs. Do you know when like you could use CDs and DVDs?
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know if you
mad.
can even,
Yeah, they used to come in the pub and ask people that. That's crazy.
So when I lived in Liverpool, yeah, there was a pub that me and my mate used to go to, and we went there most Saturday nights, you know, but to start the night off. But yeah, I can't even recall a time when he wasn't there.
Oh wow.
And he would go
CDs
around
I
all
get
the
though.
pubs.
Yeah.
Like especially if it's your own like band or something.
And they were normal DVDs, right? They weren't a bit of blue light, you know. But you're too young. I can't believe it. Heroin then.
Segue into
Heroin's completely different then, right?
They were normal DVDs, right? Heroin.
yeah.
But heroin's the other end of the scale, right? In terms of acceptability. And crack and methamphetamine. That's not going to be in the same discussion as likes of alcohol and cannabis and such.
Definitely
not. No,
Some people are like, I'm not a crackhead, and I'm like, okay.
Oh, heroin, not going to touch that.
Why are we using that nasty language?
But what I don't get right is, I'm not going to name him, but he's fairly close to us. He's not in work, by the way. He's in my personal life.
Close to in the room with us.
Just lurking in the corner there, yeah. But he had a major operation in hospital, and he was given morphine, which is pharmaceutical heroin, and he loved it. He thoroughly enjoyed, being under the influence of what he terms as morphine. So why then? And obviously, it's used every day. From a kind of medicinal purpose, why then does it go from that to the complete opposite end of the scale?
I'll always remember, like, when I was in GCSE, and one of the boys in my year had to have quite large surgery, and he came in and he was just like, oh, guys, like, I've had the best time. And we're all there like, what?
We're not advocating for the use of heroin, by the way.
And he's but that's the thing, is like, we were all just like, oh, okay, we didn't really understand what had happened. And but like, I know quite a few people that talk about their experiences using having morphine in hospital, and they do say like it just feels warm, and then you almost understand then in a way like why certain demographics would want that warmth and that comfy feeling, because they need it, because they have nowhere to sleep, they have nowhere to live, it
goes back to the double standards again of if it's for someone, say, that's homeless, is using it just to feel comfort, but someone who's been to hospital, had an operation, and then becomes addicted to it, and there's these two people that are suffering. Are people more sympathetic to the person who had the operation and needed it than the person who's sleeping on the streets? Like, why? It's the same. Let's be like, let's be real.
And
like,
they've probably tried to find accommodation and tried to find an alternative route, and they don't have an alternative route, which is a shame, it's really sad. And I think as well, like, it's that difference of like how many adults in reality do use alcohol to cope, but cannot understand
and don't admit that that's what they're doing as well.
Cannot understand that other people are using other drugs to cope. And I think there's almost this thing of like, oh, but I don't use drugs and I've been through stuff, and it's like, but first of all, you use alcohol, and second of all, would it then be okay if those people instead gained alcohol issues? Would that then be allowed?
What about, like, when you go out to a pub with a group of friends and you've got that one person who goes, no, I'm not drinking tonight, I'm going to have a glass of orange juice.
Yeah, and it's like, why? Why are you not drinking?
So, like, why is that then? Why are people giving other people a hard time just because they're like, actually, I want to still be with my friends in this social setting, but I'm not going to partake in drinking alcohol? And it's like you've offended them sometimes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not going to take part. Like,
we spoke about this on another podcast, I think, very briefly, where we kind of said about why do people feel they need to explain themselves. And I often feel that I have to explain myself, and other people are like, okay, I don't really care.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good friends.
And I'm like, I have to explain myself why I'm not drinking alcohol. But yeah, on kind of the other side of the spectrum, there's other times where I go out and I'm like, I cannot be bothered, or I'm skint or whatever. I can't be asked with a hangover. And there is almost like, oh, well, there's no point in going out then.
Yeah, stay home. It's like, well,
fine. Like, do you not want to see me? Am I not fun enough without alcohol?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just that weird expectation.
Yes. That like you need it to be able to be social in that group. Do you know what I mean? Like the why are you not taking part?
Because almost that thing about when we talk about pubs,
Yeah.
Are pubs a family space or are pubs an alcohol space? Because if pubs are not an alcohol space and more a family space, then it should be okay for me to come with you and not drink.
Yeah.
But if it's not okay for me to come with you and not drink, then they are inherently an alcohol space, which I would assume
wouldn't be family appropriate.
The main goal of a pub is to sell alcohol.
Yeah.
In my eyes. Otherwise, you'd call it a restaurant, maybe.
I guess it's multifaceted, though.
It is.
Yeah,
it's got
it
different.
is.
It's
Different
a complex,
It depends
institution.
on what time of the day it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Do
very
you know,
true.
like if it's midday, if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or even if it's like 5 o'clock in the evening, that's probably more of a kid friendly
It's more like
environment,
restaurant mode.
because
Yeah.
you've got food and stuff. Whereas come 8 o'clock in the evening, I think most pubs probably have it in play that you can't have anybody anybody in the pub under the age of 18 after a certain
9 o'clock normally,
time
innit?
frame,
Yeah,
something
half past
like that.
9.
Because ultimately, and you kind of put it in the notes beforehand, Shannon, you know, that like I think the environment of a pub will change.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because come 9 o'clock, that isn't an environment, personally for me, that I would want my son to be in.
No.
Because you're going to have people that, especially if you take at the minute the weekends, the rugby's on, people have been drinking all day. Come 9 o'clock, you're going to have quite a lot of people who've been there since 12. They've watched all the games that have been televised, and
Yeah, emotions
get
get high.
rowdy.
And
Yeah.
it's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's just weird to think that, but you would take a child or a young person to go watch the game with you in the pub. And then it's the day drinking, like you said, and the rugby culture and things of like drinking excessive amounts. And the quick shift between moods in terms of the unpredictability of how the game's going versus more that they drink, and do you know, it's all a lot
Let's
to
avoid
consider.
that topic right now.
if you go to the rugby, right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether you guys like watch much sport or anything like that, but if you go to the rugby, now you have the kind of like parts of the stands that are, I think they call them like the sober stands. So basically,
Yeah, and they did it
that's-
recently, didn't they, somewhere where they didn't actually tell the people that were going in those stands that they were going to be alcohol-free zones, and people were like demanding their money back
I
because
didn't
it was
hear
an
about that.
integral part of their experience while watching it, and they could not order alcohol. They were fuming.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know where it was, but there was a big issue with
I
that.
think it was the Principality.
Wow.
Oh.
Because it's presumed again, isn't it, that like I'm gonna have a drink when I watch the rugby.
Yeah,
Why
definitely.
would I not?
Definitely.
It's It's more of a sense of like, so we have these designated spaces that have this grey area of this overlap between family and, you know, to be able to drink alcohol, and then you like, there's no equivalent, obviously because of the legality of other drugs, but does that play a part in why we look then at those other drugs as being so like in a negative light? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That people can't fathom that like that could be a problem.
It's almost not facilitated within public space. And I think it's interesting as well because I think trust comes into it. You're trusted to make safe decisions, which you don't have with other drugs. The trust is taken away from you, whereas it's like, these are the rules, we trust you to follow them, we trust you to only have 14 units a week, and we trust you to not give alcohol to your children and to not drink too much. And do you know what I mean? Like there's that trust.
You
there.
can understand this concept when it comes to alcohol, but God forbid you'd be able to do the same regulations for other drugs. Basically, like what we're incapable of that measuring that for other substances. It's really strange.
And I don't think even if you did regulate all drugs, you would have those spaces.
No.
Like what you have is like pubs for alcohol. I don't think. Okay, you may, in terms of, okay, if you're going down the route like a drug consumption room, but they'll be very clinical.
Yeah,
It wouldn't be like,
it's not welcoming.
Family-friendly environment.
Definitely not.
You wouldn't have like a consumption room, like where you just walk in and there's all these like nice patterns on the wall, and you just go in, you get your tab, and you just have a mad trip. Like, do you know what I mean? Just for fun.
It's purposefully designed so that it's not going to seem like there's an appeal there.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Whereas like you're not going to have like a cannabis park.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like a designated outdoor space where you could just smoke.
Yeah.
That, like, come on, you know?
Could you imagine like a little bus shelter like you have with like cigarettes right now? But
Yeah.
Similar, it says like cannabis.
Yeah. Like I went to the airport obviously because when
They got the smoking rooms.
the
haven't
smoking
they?
room, so the people are there
Fascinating.
like itching, like you get through security and it's like, right, I want a fag now. And it's mad, like you see people, like I was over here and people like, oh, smoking area over there, and then I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. You would then go outside in a designated area to have a fag. Like whilst
Oh
you're in
no,
the
I've
airport.
seen them, and it almost looks like they are inside ones with like
No.
filters.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's really
crazy,
interesting. Like just
isn't
in the
it?
middle of the airport. I
Yeah,
just think
because we're
that's
going to
mad.
accommodate for the people that need to have a cigarette, and you can drink in the airport as well.
Yeah.
It's different
You know?
rules in an airport.
It's weird. Yeah,
It
it's
is,
weird.
yeah.
The
like
concept
there
of
are
time.
places to buy
Yeah.
alcohol in. Like I think Bristol Airport's got like Budweiser or Coors Light in their Burger King, so which I found really cool.
But yeah, it doesn't matter what time
Time
it
it
is.
is,
In the airport.
no.
You get there for like 10 o'clock.
You're just in the airport. It's like
You're
liminal
in
space.
international spaces.
Yeah.
Time does not exist.
Yeah. But it's strange to think that they've gone the extra mile of finding like spaces for people to have a fag and stuff in that situation. Like I said, don't think the same treatment would be for other things, other drugs, even
Definitely
if it was
not.
to become legal. It'll be a long time coming before it would be socially acceptable.
And that's the thing in it, is when we talk about like decriminalisation or legalisation with regulation, it's never about a free-for-all and like let's just use it recreationally. And I can't remember where I heard it or read it, but somebody said something along the lines of, if alcohol was a new substance and got tested today, there's no way it would be legal. There's no way it would be legal. Absolutely not. Like, it's mad. And I just think like the fact that it is legal is just because of how essential it is to society in Britain. But then is it fair that we have the same rules then when we think about how certain substances are essential to other societies?
Yeah.
Like coca in South America, and well, I mean, South America, you do get a lot of things like ayahuasca and you know, all those things that are really integral to their societies, kava in like Fiji and things like that. So like, what are the rules there? And you know, those things are integral parts of those societies. So you know, I just think it's really interesting. Why? Because just like how harmful alcohol is. Like, it's just so harmful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, it's mad.
It is.
I think we can just kind of keep going, really, isn't it? In terms
Yeah,
of
it's
this,
never-ending.
so maybe a part 2 will be in the line, in the pipeline. Who knows, guys? Hannah, Shannon, thank you very much, and we will see you all soon. Bye bye. If you have been affected by any of the issues discussed in today's podcast, please reach out. Barod have a free and confidential live web chat service that is available 7 days a week on our website at barod.cymru, where you can chat to a trained support worker. Alternatively, you can contact Wales's National Drug and Alcohol Helpline, Dan 24/7, either by calling 0808 808 2234 or text Dan to 81066.